Welcome, dear listener. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the golden domes of Constantinople glimmering under the morning sun. The air is filled with the faint scent of salt from the sea, mingled with the fragrance of incense drifting from countless churches. This is the Byzantine Empire, a world where East met West, where ancient Roman traditions fused with Christian devotion, and where wealth and power created lives of both unimaginable luxury and intense scrutiny. Yet beneath the glittering mosaics, beneath the chants of priests and the solemn rituals of empire, there existed another world, a quieter, more private one. A world of whispered secrets, of hidden practices, of desires carefully controlled yet impossible to suppress. In this journey, we will not focus on wars or politics, though they were ever present. Instead, we will step into the intimate shadows of Byzantine life, where sexuality, often condemned in public, thrived in hidden corners. These practices, sometimes seen as scandalous or even horrific by later chroniclers, played a profound role in shaping history. And at the center of this story is one extraordinary woman, Empress Theodora. Once an actress of ill repute, she rose higher than anyone thought possible, ruling alongside Emperor Justinian and becoming one of the most powerful women in the medieval world. Her journey, from the dim stages of Constantinople's theaters to the gleaming halls of imperial authority, cannot be told without understanding the sexual customs, expectations, and contradictions of her time. So, settle in. Allow yourself to drift into the slow rhythm of history's pulse. Tonight, we begin with daily life in Byzantium, where private rituals and public judgment coexisted in uneasy harmony. Imagine yourself walking through the crowded streets of Constantinople, the great capital of Byzantium. Around you, merchants shout their wares in the marketplace, the scent of roasted fish mingles with the sweetness of honey cakes, and processions of priests pass by, their chants echoing beneath marble colonnades. It is a city alive with sound and movement, a place where faith and desire constantly collided. For women, life in Byzantium was shaped by layers of expectation. The Christian faith preached modesty, chastity, and devotion, while the legacy of Rome still lingered, with its theatrical entertainments, bathhouses, and looser attitudes toward pleasure. The result was a culture caught between two worlds, publicly condemning indulgence, yet privately unable to escape it. Marriage was central, seen as both a holy sacrament and a practical arrangement. Families arranged unions carefully, considering wealth, alliances, and honor. A young bride might enter her new household shy and uncertain, her role defined less by affection than by duty. Yet beneath this formality, intimacy carried its own complexities. Husbands sought companionship not only at home but also in taverns, theaters, and in encounters that the church sternly disapproved of. The Byzantine world was also one of extremes. In the palace, empresses and noblewomen lived lives wrapped in silks and guarded by attendants, their movements watched and controlled. In poorer districts, women labored openly in markets or worked as entertainers, their lives judged harshly by society yet sustained by the very men who condemned them. The theater, in particular, played a controversial role. Performers, especially women, were often associated with scandal. Actresses sang, danced, and sometimes engaged in acts meant to shock or amuse the audience. Chroniclers later described these performances as shameful, emphasizing indecency and excess. And yet, these same performers captivated audiences, earning not only coin but influence. It was from this very world that Theodora herself emerged. Consider, too, the role of the church. Preachers thundered against desire, condemning immorality from their pulpits, while monks withdrew into monasteries to escape temptation altogether. And yet, in the same city, brothels operated openly, their presence an unspoken reality. Laws were passed to regulate such practices, sometimes punishing women harshly, while men often escaped with little consequence. Imagine the daily rhythm of a Byzantine woman's life. Morning prayers whispered beneath an icon's gaze. Afternoons filled with weaving, cooking, or bargaining in the market. Evenings shadowed by the hum of taverns and theaters nearby, places of laughter, temptation, and scandal. To live in Byzantium was to navigate constant contradictions, devotion alongside indulgence, piety alongside whispered pleasures. And in these contradictions, opportunities arose. For some women, rare and extraordinary, the very practices condemned by society became a pathway to power. Let us now turn from the bustling markets and crowded theaters of Constantinople to the life of one remarkable woman, Theodora. Her story begins not in the glittering palace, but in the shadows of the stage. Born around the year 500, Theodora was the daughter of a bear keeper who worked for the Hippodrome, the great arena where chariots thundered in races that could shake the empire itself. Her childhood was modest, her family poor, and her prospects, at least in the eyes of society, were unremarkable. From a young age, Theodora was drawn into the world of performance. The Byzantine theater was vibrant, but it carried with it an unmistakable stigma. Female performers were seen as little better than courtesans, their reputation forever colored by rumors and assumptions about what they offered beyond the stage. Chroniclers, often hostile to women in power, wrote bitterly of Theodora's early years, describing acts that shocked polite society. Whether exaggerated or true, these accounts reveal how deeply entrenched society's suspicion of women's independence truly was. Imagine her on a small stage, beneath the torchlight, her voice rising above laughter and applause. She was clever, quick-witted, and skilled in using both charm and intelligence to command attention. In a society where women's roles were often confined to the household, Theodora learned early to survive in a space where she was watched, judged, and desired. And yet, her path did not remain in the theater forever. After a time traveling to North Africa, perhaps in search of opportunity or fleeing hardship, Theodora experienced a transformation. By the time she returned to Constantinople, she had embraced Christianity deeply, adopting a life of modesty that contrasted with her earlier reputation. This shift was not merely personal faith, but also a careful reinvention, a way to navigate the rigid expectations of Byzantine society. It was during this period that Theodora caught the attention of Justinian, the man who would become emperor. He was captivated not just by her beauty, but by her intelligence and presence. Chroniclers admit, even begrudgingly, that she was no ordinary woman. Justinian sought to marry her, but Byzantine law at the time forbade unions between men of high rank and women of shameful profession. To overcome this, the law itself was changed, an extraordinary alteration that signaled Theodora's exceptional influence even before she wore a crown. Their marriage was more than a personal bond. It was a partnership of power. When Justinian ascended to the throne, Theodora was crowned alongside him. In the glittering ceremony of Hagia Sophia, she took her place not as a shadow behind the emperor, but as his equal, robed in purple and adorned with jewels that reflected the light of countless candles. From that day forward, Theodora was no longer merely a figure of whispered scandal. She was empress. She sat in councils, advised on laws, and played a decisive role in shaping policy. Some accounts describe her as stern, uncompromising, and unafraid to face the empire's most powerful men. In the infamous Nika riots, when Constantinople itself seemed on the verge of collapse, it was Theodora's steady voice that convinced Justinian to stay and fight rather than flee. Her words, recorded in history, remind us of her strength. That imperial purple, she said, was a noble shroud. But her power was not only political. Theodora used her influence to address the very realities she had once endured. She pushed for reforms that granted women more protection, strengthened laws against exploitation, and improved the standing of actresses and courtesans who had long been dismissed as outcasts. In this, we see not just an empress, but a woman who remembered her past and sought to alter the future. Theodora's life, then, is a paradox. Chroniclers tried to tarnish her image with lurid tales, yet those same whispers only highlight the enormity of her rise. From the margins of society, she stepped into the center of power, wielding influence that few women in history ever achieved. As we leave her for now, seated beside Justinian in the golden halls of the palace, we see how deeply her story was bound to the intimate customs of Byzantine life. For it was precisely those practices, scandalous, controversial, and whispered in shadows, that opened the unlikely path to her throne. When we think of the Byzantine Empire, our minds often turn to domes of gold, the scent of incense rising in vast cathedrals, and emperors wrapped in imperial purple. Yet beneath the grandeur of official ceremony, there was another layer of society, one filled with secrecy, suspicion, and whispered customs. The Byzantines lived in a world where religion and daily life were deeply intertwined. Christianity was not only the faith of the empire, but also a powerful guide for behavior, shaping what was considered acceptable and what was condemned. Officially, the church was strict. Sexuality outside of marriage was frowned upon, and the writings of church fathers frequently warned against excess, indulgence, and passion. And yet, human lives rarely conform neatly to ideals. Behind closed doors, people sought pleasure, companionship, and intimacy in ways that often clashed with the church's teachings. Prostitution, for instance, was both condemned and tolerated. The authorities knew it was widespread, and while moralists railed against it, emperors often turned a pragmatic eye. Theodora herself, once associated with this world, later worked to regulate it, creating safe houses where women could escape exploitation and find protection. The court itself, the very heart of imperial power, was not immune to intrigue of a more personal kind. Chroniclers, especially those hostile to Justinian and Theodora, filled their accounts with scandalous tales, stories of hidden liaisons, of women wielding influence through charm as much as through counsel, and of nobles who whispered in dark corridors about the private lives of the powerful. These stories may have been exaggerated, but they reveal how much fascination there was with intimacy at the highest levels of power. Imagine the palace at night. By day, it rang with footsteps of officials and the echoes of ceremonies. By night, it became a place of secrets. Courtiers whispered behind embroidered curtains, rumors traveled faster than the sound of bells, and reputations could be destroyed not by armies, but by suggestion. In such a world, the personal lives of emperors and empresses mattered just as much as their political decisions. One of the more curious aspects of Byzantine society was the tension between extreme asceticism and hidden indulgence. On the one hand, monasteries flourished, filled with men and women who renounced worldly pleasures. On the other hand, accounts survive of elaborate feasts, of entertainments where wine flowed freely, and of theaters where performances often blurred the line between art and sensuality. This paradox was the rhythm of Byzantine life: strict rules, but constant temptation. Even the architecture of Constantinople tells us something of these contrasts. The public baths, for example, inherited from Roman tradition, remained centers of both cleanliness and social mingling. Men and women bathed separately, but rumors always persisted of meetings and assignations. The hippodrome, where tens of thousands gathered for chariot races, was as much a place of flirtation and gossip as it was of sport. In the noise of the crowd, alliances, both political and personal, were formed. Theodora's reforms offer us an especially intriguing glimpse into how sexuality was woven into law and culture. By banning certain exploitative practices, she implicitly acknowledged how widespread they had been. By offering protections, she sought not only to improve women's lives, but also to reshape the moral fabric of the empire. Her policies tell us more than the hostile chronicles do. They show a ruler attempting to manage realities that society preferred to keep hidden. But we must remember that much of what we know comes from biased sources. Writers like Procopius, who composed the infamous Secret History, painted vivid, sometimes scandalous, portraits of Theodora and Justinian. He described lurid performances, accusations of insatiable desire, and shocking acts. Modern historians read these accounts with caution. They likely reveal less about what truly happened and more about the fears and obsessions of the author himself. Still, even as exaggerations, they preserve for us an image of a society where sexuality was deeply tied to reputation and power. It is this mixture of secrecy, morality, and rumor that gives Byzantine culture its air of mystery. A world where church bells rang constantly, yet scandals whispered just as persistently through the marble halls. A world where the body was condemned, but could never truly be denied. And it was in this very world that Theodora thrived. She understood both the dangers of scandal and the power of reputation. She used her knowledge of the empire's hidden customs not to be trapped by them, but to master them. To understand Theodora's remarkable journey, one must step back and look at the Byzantine Empire itself, a vast, layered society, where the distance between the palace and the common home could feel like two entirely different worlds. Inside the Palace of Constantinople, life unfolded with ritual precision. Imagine a place where nearly every act was ceremonial. The emperor and empress were rarely seen without golden robes, jeweled crowns, and attendants surrounding them. Meals were not merely eaten, they were staged, with dishes carried in elaborate order, musicians playing softly in the background, and courtiers watching every gesture. Theodora's days as empress were filled with councils, receptions, and ceremonies. Even walking across a hall was an act of power. Courtiers were expected to bow, and no one addressed the empress casually. The air of the palace was heavy with incense, the glow of mosaics lit chambers in golden hues, and the constant hum of bureaucracy, the scribes, the ministers, the guards, ensured that no corner was ever truly silent. Now, contrast this with the streets just outside the palace walls. The city of Constantinople was alive with noise. Merchants shouted their prices in the markets, fishermen brought in their morning catches, and artisans hammered away in their workshops. The smell of fresh bread mingled with that of animals and smoke from household fires. The majority of Byzantines lived in modest homes, often crowded, with simple furnishings and little privacy. For ordinary people, life was a constant balance between survival and community. They gathered at wells to collect water, huddled in taverns for warmth and companionship, and flocked to the hippodrome for entertainment. For them, the empire's grand religious debates and court intrigues often felt distant. What mattered more was the price of grain, the threat of disease, or whether this year's harvest would be plentiful. The contrast was stark. While the empress dined on delicacies, the poor often ate bread and porridge. While the palace halls echoed with discussions of law and diplomacy, the alleyways echoed with the laughter of children and the worries of parents. Yet both worlds were connected, woven into the same fabric of empire. The laws that Justinian and Theodora passed affected even the humblest families. The Nika riots, which once threatened to tear the empire apart, were fueled by the passions of ordinary people who filled the hippodrome stands. Theodora never forgot this. Perhaps because of her own humble beginnings, she understood the struggles of ordinary women and men more clearly than most rulers. While she presided over councils in marble halls, she also created protections for women outside those walls. She lived in the rare position of bridging both worlds, the glittering, ceremonial life of the palace and the harsher, humbler reality of the streets. Imagine, then, the empire as a vast tapestry. At its center shone the bright gold threads of the imperial court, intricate and dazzling. Around it stretched darker, simpler strands, the lives of farmers, craftsmen, and laborers. Theodora's life touched both, giving her a perspective few empresses ever had. And so, when she walked through her palace gardens, hearing the fountains splash gently against marble basins, she knew that beyond the walls, the same water supplied the people at the city's fountains. When she listened to prayers inside Hagia Sophia, she knew that outside, families lit small candles before humble icons in their homes. The empire was vast, but it was shared. The contrast between palace and people reveals not only the gulf of wealth and power, but also the threads of connection. It was in this duality that Theodora's story unfolded, a woman who began among the common crowds, but who ended her days as one of the most powerful figures in Byzantium. As we draw this journey to a close, let your thoughts drift back across the centuries, to the shining domes of Constantinople, where Theodora once walked among mosaics and marble. Her story, like so many in history, is both extraordinary and familiar. Extraordinary, in the way she rose from humble beginnings to rule beside an emperor. Familiar, in the quiet echoes of daily life, the meals eaten, the struggles endured, the hopes cherished, that were not so different from our own. Theodora's life teaches us something about resilience. She began in obscurity, endured hardship, and yet, by strength of will and clarity of mind, she carved a place for herself at the very heart of power. Her reforms, her influence, and her legacy remind us that even within the grandeur of empires, individual voices can shape the course of history. And yet, Her story is also a reminder of fragility. Even in the most glittering palaces, life was uncertain. Illness, unrest, and the weight of time touched all, from the humblest laborer to the most powerful empress. In this, the Byzantines were no different from us. Their worries, their joys, their dreams, all were part of the same human fabric we share today. So, as you let your eyes grow heavy, think of Constantinople fading into the soft night. The bustling streets grow quieter, the torches dim, and the palace halls, once filled with ceremony, settle into stillness. Somewhere, perhaps, Theodora herself might have stood at a window, looking out over the city, aware of both the power she held and the world beyond her walls. History is like that, layers of grandeur and simplicity, of triumph and struggle, woven together into stories that endure long after empires crumble. Tonight, you have wandered through one such story, and now it is time to let it rest, as you too prepare for rest. Let the rhythm of the past settle gently in your thoughts. Imagine the faint hum of the Bosporus waves, the whisper of wind through narrow streets, the soft glow of oil lamps in windows. The city sleeps, and so may you. Good night.